All right, so we decided to do some Facebook questions for Herschel to find out some of the answers to the questions you guys had. First question was actually mine. What's your top 5 citrus to eat? And what are, say, 3 trees that are really just beautiful growers, whether it's your favorite, taste or not?
Always number 1 is cashew. It's just easy to grow, easy to peel, easy to eat, 0 seed, not capable of producing the seed. Secondly would be Shiranui. Third be my favorite is Poncan, has a few seed, but the taste is just there every time you try one. After that, some of the mandarins, probably Owari, Brown Select. I probably like Owari better. Zishan is excellent from time to time. China 1 if you like something sweet. I'm going over 5, but there's so many that I like so much, it's hard to put a limit on it.
Now, what about something that's got a little bit of a sour flavor to it?
The lime quartz. You just can't get better than the Lakeland lime quartz. What's the other one that I like?
I like Sunquat and a Fukushu.
Fukushu is not really a sour one. It's a sweet peel, tender flesh, but it does have that little streak down the center that will make you think it's going to lock your jaw, but it don't last long. It's loaded with flavor. Eustace Limequat, Tavares.
Okay.
There's not a bad one. Sunquat, if you want something that's not really sour, little hint of lemon, but sweet.
A lot of juice, too.
A lot of juice. Kids can eat it out of hand. Peel and all. It's easy.
Okay, so other than taste, what are some growers that are just pretty trees?
Oh, gosh. There's so many that I like. All the variegated trees. I'm a variegation fanatic. The variegated Mineola. It's one of the prettiest underrated trees there is. The variegated Calamondin, we're going to have that available in a very short time. Everybody's wanting variegated Caracara. It's a beautiful tree. The fruit's not much, but everybody says I'm a little too honest, but I want you to have it straight. I don't want you to be hyped up that it's going to be wonderful fruit. Grow it for the foliage. Don't grow it for the fruit.
Another pretty one is that mottled Mineola that's right next to
The mottled Mineola it's not eye-catching long way off. It don't hurt your eyes, but up close to it, it's eye-catching. You just can't stop looking at the leaves.
There's really nothing else like it.
No, it's the only one I know of, and as far as we know, we're the only ones that carry it.
All right, so second question is one that people tend to ask about dwarf trees. So how big does a dwarf tree get? And for container growers, would you recommend getting a dwarf or limiting the growth of a regular sized tree by pot? Lenoy, she says she's afraid she'll buy a dwarf and it'll grow too slowly in a pot. And then the follow-up would be, what size pot should she stop repotting and let the tree stay there at that size if the pot is a limiting factor?
There's so many factors on using flying dragon as a rootstock. On mandarins, it tends to dwarf them tremendously. On lemons and grapefruit, sometimes you wonder, did I really put it on a flying dragon rootstock? In a grove, on lemons and grapefruit, on a 10-year-old tree, you might see 2 feet shorter in height. For a mandarin, I've got mandarins 15 years old that are only maybe 5 feet tall, whereas one on a swingle or a full-size rootstock would probably be 8 to 10 feet tall. But now keep in mind, mandarins don't get tall, they get wide. So that same tree is probably 15 to 18 feet wide, but it's short. But now the flying dragon with a mandarin on it is probably only 6 feet wide. So if you got limited space, the flying dragon is fine. If you've got plenty of space, I don't recommend dwarfing rootstock. For a container, dwarfing rootstock, it's going to grow about half as fast, and if it does get some cold damage, it's not going to rebound like it would on a medium or full-size rootstock. Your limiting factor is going to be container size, and I like large trees, large containers, but I know you've got to move them in and out. So you're going to have to just play with it, and that's something that just takes years to figure out. At my age, I want instant gratification. I don't want dwarfing rootstock, but it might be right for some people.
Okay, and as far as limiting the size, judicious pruning, I mean pod size, things like that, are they going to be able to keep up with something?
The bad thing about pruning it, if you try to keep it pruned, it's going to continue trying to grow and it's going to stay in juvenile state. If it's in juvenile, it's trying to grow and it's not producing fruit. If you want a tree to fruit a lot, try not to prune it any more than you have to. If you've got a limb growing off to the side, you can shape it by shortening that limb, but try not to trim it any more than you have to. Let it get to its maximum size in that pot, then it'll flower and fruit much better for you.
Okay, and one last follow-up with that. As far as the pot size itself, kind of the biggest so they can still handle and move around,
The
or
bigger the better, and use lighter soils, the peat soils that we use. Some of the pine bark based soils, they're not bad soils. They don't hold water quite as good if you're in a really wet area. But if you'll notice, our trees grown here, we keep ours on the wet side. I don't want a tree to dry out at all. If it dries out, it stops growing for several weeks till it recovers. Now, if you get root rot, that's another bad thing. But I don't know if it's just that we use fungicides regular, but we'd never have root rot. Just not it's not a problem for us.
okay, so perfect. Now, Lorelei had a question about acclimation. I know there's a couple answers on this. She said, how soon after repotting, or how soon do you repot after getting a brand new citrus tree? Should I acclimate it to its new home a bit first?
My thoughts on that, if you could put it in a new pot halfway during transit would be wonderful. They're not people. They don't understand they've been there 2 weeks. When you get the tree, take it out of the little pot, put it in a big pot, make it happy. If you're going to put it in the ground, the best time to put it in the ground was 5 years ago. You'd have a beautiful tree by now. Don't wait. Go ahead and up pot. Now, if it comes out of our greenhouse, it has 55% shade on it. But keep in mind, we grow trees here that go directly to the groves. Some of our customers buy 5,000 trees. They don't complain that they lost all their leaves. A few will get sunburned. They grow back out. Inspect them from 20 feet. They're beautiful at 20 feet. You look at every leaf up close, you're going to find an imperfection.
Okay, but what if they wanted to do that partial shade thing for a week or two that some people suggest?
If you want to do that, there's nothing wrong with it, but just remember, the longer you keep it in the shade, the harder it's going to be to acclimate it to the sun.
Okay. Erica asks, what are your fastest growers and which trees are cold hardy under 10 degrees? And you can bump it up to 15.
Under 10 degrees, and there's so many different variables with temperature. Okay, let's go into that a little bit. You say,
I think that's going to be a different video altogether as well. Okay. Because there's so much there.
There's so much to it. But a tree that makes it through 25 degrees one year could be killed at 30 degrees the following year if it already had sustained a little bit of damage. Then a tree that will make it at 20 degrees this year could be killed the next year at 25 degrees if it's at a different time and that tree is not shut down and adjusted to the winter coming on. We like for it to be a few frost, a few light freezes, a mediocre freeze, and then if it gets a heavy freeze, it's probably not going to hurt it as bad. But this year we had that Christmas 16 degrees. Here in Ray City, we was at 16 degrees for 3 nights in a row. Barely got above freezing one day and didn't get above freezing the next day. That's hard for trees to live through, but the groves here made it, especially the farmers that really took care of their trees. They did really well.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with whether it was watered prior, the health of the tree, the wind that was there, if there's any protection. I mean, cold hardiness, you really do have to still protect them a little bit. You have
to protect the trees, and what we recommend is the farmers spray the trees down with their microjets. Some farmers don't want to do that. They want to wet the ground down, hoping that some heat will rise. I think they found out that wasn't the best thing this year. We do recommend wetting the tree, let the ice make a capsule around the tree, and you might have a few broken limbs, but would you rather have a few broken limbs or a lot of dead trees? I prefer the broken limbs.
And with a homeowner, just to go and tie it back to these guys for the most part, you've told me in the past a bag of water, a bucket of water, wrap the tree with some sort of shade cloth kind of thing.
Well, you can wrap it with cloth, but you're not putting anything there to withhold heat. I recommend a 55-gallon drum, paint it black, set it right beside the tree, a little piece of rug on the outside, securing it to that drum. Fill the drum full of water, let the sun heat it up during the day, It'll release heat during the night. If you don't have that, use Glad trash bags. Drive your stake down, pull the strings up, put them on top of the stake, fill those bags full of water, wrap a sheet around it, wrap a piece of plastic. If you use plastic, only one layer. If you put 2 layers, it's a magnifying glass. But water contains a lot of BTUs. It releases those BTUs real slow during the night, and it would take a lot of cold for that block of water to freeze into ice, and it'll continue releasing heat throughout the night, and then hopefully warm up again the next day. So that don't require any electricity. Light bulbs are okay, not the best.
Okay, so that's really how to extend some of the cold hardiness.
That's
but now,
correct.
as far as the trees themselves, varieties, what's fastest grower? What are a couple cold hardy ones?
Fastest growers are always lemons and grapefruit, but those are probably your least cold hardy. Grapefruit have proved to be cold hardy once they get 4 to 5, 6 years old. Faster grower, Shiranois, some of the mandarins grow out really fast. Owari, Brown Select, Sugar Bell. I think Sugar Bell's the fastest thing in our grove. It's an excellent fruit, has a few seeds, a little bit hard to peel, but it's worth the time and just an absolute gorgeous tree.
Okay, and as far as the cold hardy side, if you go to our website, there's actually a cold hardy collection that will list a lot of the trees that are more cold hardy, and we did put a description on a lot of them that do talk about how cold hardy they are, so it's probably better to go there and look. Dana asks, what should your first citrus be? A newbie question.
Oh gosh.
That's a hard one to answer. He would answer all of them.
One of each is a good place to start. Kumquats. I don't recommend Miwia. Nagami, the lime quats, Centennial, they stay relatively small. They grow relatively fast. Miwia is just a slow grower, but it's a great fruit.
Yeah, I guess if you try to grow that first and it's just not doing anything,
That's
it might
correct.
be a turnoff.
It's even difficult for me to grow because they just grow so slow. They don't start blooming till, let's see, January, February, March, April, May, early June, but it only takes 5 months for the fruit to ripen, which is a very short time for citrus. So they bloom late, they go dormant early. So they're not growing but a few months out of the year. They're asleep the rest of the time. So they're relatively cold hardy, but boy, you just don't get a lot of action there.
There's a lot of flavor there too, and it's funny because the gateway citrus is typically a Meyer lemon.
It's typically a Meyer lemon.
Which isn't bad, but there's better.
There's better. The Meyer lemon was just sold at so many box stores, so many people had access to it. That was probably the thing. Meyer lemon gives a lot of people a difficult time. For us, it's relatively easy. I don't see a problem.
It's just good that it's a little bit cold hardy of a lemon.
It's not actually a lemon.
A man.
It's a mandarin orange citron cross that tastes like a lemon. So that makes it simple, doesn't it?
Yeah, that makes it very easy. Paulie asks, if a citrus is grafted on a dwarf rootstock, does it slow down the growth of the tree overall? Or just parts of the root system, or perhaps does it prolong the fruiting stage? So what effects does flying dragon have, or dwarfing rootstock have?
Okay, the dwarfing rootstock goes dormant earlier in the fall, stays dormant longer in the spring. So that's how it helps to retard the growth of the tree, and it's just a small rootstock. But then on the other hand, if you put lemon and some of the grapefruits on a dwarfing rootstock, those make the rootstock grow faster, and then your rootstock only might be 2 inches in diameter, and then your scion might be 3 inches in diameter right above it. So they pull the tar out of that thing, and they continue to grow. So dwarfing rootstock don't always work. That's why I prefer a medium growing rootstock. If you do have some cold damage, it'll recover faster. If you have spider mite problems, it'll recover faster, and it just recovers faster from any problems you have. Dwarfing rootstock's not always the answer. Sometimes it's the problem.
And for the most part, the trees on our site, the only ones that we really specify what the rootstocks are the dwarfing ones. All those are on Flying Dragon. So that's really what you're talking about.
All on Flying Dragon is the dwarfing rootstock, yes.
All right, perfect. I'm going to skip over the one from Dave for now, and we'll go back to it because it's going to be a longer answer.
Okay.
Elizabeth asks, which rootstock is best for beginners, and what trees or varieties are the hardest to graft?
Hardest to graft, there's nothing particularly hard to graft. You use a little bit different techniques. Say things that are real thorny, like the finger limes, they're difficult. They they don't take as well. The red finger lime is the one we're having trouble with. The Australian red pulp, you kind of just throw a piece at a rootstock and it seems to take. So right there you got two finger limes that are totally different. Bergamot sour orange we've had some problems with. Most of the mandarins we get 99.9999 take.
Which was the quat you couldn't get to take for a while?
Miwea was an aggravating one. And a lot of times it's just not wanting to grow. It just wants to sit there and the buds just don't break and grow. But most of the time, if you try a variety this week and they don't grow, 3 months later when you realize they didn't grow, you try it again, you get 100%. So I can't say that one variety is harder. That particular tree just might not have been in the right growing time, or you might have pulled the buds a little too tender. There's so many things that it could have been. We haven't figured all that out yet. We just do it again.
And as far as the rootstock side, what do you recommend for a beginner?
Oh gosh,
Not that it matters.
I don't grow any rootstocks here that I wouldn't recommend. If I don't like it, I don't want you to have it because it's going to be a problem.
Flying dragon can be harder though, where it's twisty.
Flying dragon is harder to graft because there's not as many straight parts in it, but it doesn't give us a problem. And our guys graft so much. The 942 has flying dragon in its parentage. It's a semi-dwarf. Rich, rubido. If you notice that every leaf they go back into a little bit when they're small. 802, X639, they all do well.
Right, and we do have most of the rootstocks available. So she's looking to do her own grafting. So
Yep.
you can pick up most of that on the website. And then any of the buds of pretty much everything you've made available.
We have almost buds of everything on our website available. We want to make it easy for you at as reasonable price as we can. It's not all about money, but we have to do that to stay in business.
What is your preferred fertilizer regimen? Now, it's a little bit different for what you're doing versus what they'll do at home.
Just remember here, I'm trying to grow trees as fast as possible. We fertilize every week during the growing season through our irrigation. It's called fertigation. I don't like using the big words like mayonnaise. We use mayo. I can say that. Yeah. I can't even spell it, but I can say it. We use 20-10-20. The reason we keep the middle number low is if you raise the middle number higher, it ties up your calcium in your soil, and it'd be hard for the tree to, or almost impossible for the tree to absorb the calcium, even though you add extra calcium. Now, as far as nitrogen, we use the 20-10-20. We like high nitrogen. I also use 13-6-6. Because we're growing the tree fast. We're not trying to grow fruit. Once you start trying to grow fruit, you want to reduce your nitrogen, keep your phosphorus low, be your middle number, and raise your last number a little bit, and that helps with some fruit set. There's a lot of other things you do in the grove to ensure a heavy fruit set, but we don't have time to get into all that here, and it's different on every variety and every soil type. There is no instant information on that.
Jennifer asks just basic tips for people growing in pots or containers in the northern climates.
Well, I always tell everybody when you get a tree, remember to plant it green side up.
I was going to say, I figured your advice would be to move.
move south. Move south. Move to God's country. One thing is don't disturb the root ball. We don't ship out trees that are root bound. If they're root bound, we're going to do something else with them. We're not going to send them out to a beginner. We'll pot them ourselves. We'll do something else with them, but I don't want you to get a tree that's going to be a problem. Just don't disturb the root ball. Put it in a larger pot, at least 2 to 3 times bigger than it is. If you get a 3 gallon, you can go up as much as a 15. If you get a 1 gallon, you can go 3, 5, 7. You just use a good soil. You know, I would like to be able to tell you go to this box store and get this bag of soil. It's not that easy. It just don't work. If it would work, we would use it. It
depends too much on where they live or climate and all that stuff too.
There's too many variables. There's too many variables with it.
So just make sure you keep it well watered. I mean, water deeply. Make sure you fertilize.
If it does dry out, it's hard to get that soil re-wet. If you look through our greenhouse, there's 5 gallon buckets sitting everywhere. We'll take one and drop it in the bucket. It might sit there 3 days. It'll be fine. We take it back out and set it back on the shelf. We don't want them dried out. It's the hardest thing. You'll put a water hose up there and you'll think you have re-wet that soil. It doesn't happen that easy. it has got to actually soak up the water, and then it'll be fine for quite some time. Potting soil comes with a wetting agent in it. That wetting agent is washed out and goes away after a few months of use, so it's hard to re-wet. So don't be concerned about soaking that root ball to get it wet. It'll be fine.
All right, and the last piece with that question is maybe look at the varieties that you're growing. I mean, it would be great to be able to grow any variety you want, but you need to make sure that it'll be something that can ripen, in the seasons that you have available.
Well, most all fruit is going to bloom in the spring, grow throughout the summer, and ripen late fall. Here it's November, December, January, and some into February. Most places it'll be too cold for that, so you're having to move your trees inside anyway. Most require some heat for them to ripen quickly, but they like some cool weather also to sweeten up.
So it's a little bit of a balance.
So they like the cool nights, the warm days, a little bit of cool temperature. I know some varieties will set their green on the tree till we have a light frost or a night in the 50s, and in 3 days they're beautiful orange. Even though they were ripe and sweet before that, but everybody thinks probably not going to be good. But everybody asks, how do I tell if they're ripe? Taste one. That's pretty easy.
Pam asks, my container-grown citrus looked wonderful. New leaves, blooms, lots of fruit. Now leaves are blotchy, marble-sized fruit are dropping. Even a tennis ball-sized cara dropped. It's a sad sight. She fertilizes and waters regularly, but is looking for help.
It's easy to say I water regularly, but in higher temperatures, your soil has lost the wetting agent. It doesn't retain as much water. In the summer months, I even recommend putting a small tray under your pots that will hold some water. It's a common thought that everybody's going to rot the roots off the trees by keeping them too wet. Summer months, sometimes it's hard to keep them wet enough. I would rather my trees be slightly overwatered than underwatered, because like I say, if that tree wilts and sits there dehydrating, it takes it several weeks to recover. So you're losing a lot of growth. As far as June drop, when you start losing fruit, young trees are notorious for that. Even in the groves, we'll have the June drop. They will shed 20-30% of their fruit, and you'll think the ground is covered. They'll never have anything. Come November and the fruit starts turning ripe, then you think if it had held on to all that fruit, they would be laying on the ground now. The tree knows if it can't hold it all, it will drop some most of the time. Sometimes they don't.
Colin asks, how did you get into growing citrus, and how did you turn it into doing a living? I know you kind of answered that on the Facebook page. Yeah, I kind of answered it on the Facebook page, but as a small child, I guess I was somewhere 12 to 14 years old. I was looking over a fence into the banker's backyard, and he had a really small satsuma tree, and he saw me looking at it, and he came out and said, boys, what y'all looking at? And I said, I'm looking at that little tree, and he explained to me it was a satsuma. But it only had 5 fruit on it, so I pretty much knew I wouldn't get one. So we was at another friend of my dad's house a few weeks later, and there was a gargantuous tree loaded with fruit, and they encouraged me to pick some. I was hooked, just absolute hooked, and I realized if I ever get driver's license, I'll buy every fruit tree I can. And here in a small town, you could get anything you wanted as long as you wanted Owari, Meyer Lemon, Hamlin, Ruby Red, or Miwia. That was our choices. After making a few trips to Orlando, back then it wasn't a problem to bring them across the Florida line into Georgia. There wasn't diseases that were just running rampant. So I started collecting. Then I found there was other collectors, and when the internet came along, I realized I wasn't the only fool that was just obsessed with citrus. Now I see a lot of people like that, and it's welcoming.
It is welcoming.
You're safe here.
Then you see what I grow here. I think we only had 210 varieties up until this week, and Rock Cristiano runs California Citrus Clonal Program. I think I said that wrong, but it's close enough. He obliges me with buds when I give him a call, and I think he got us 18 more varieties this week. So I'm kind of here going through trimmers. I didn't have enough varieties, but I think we're getting it settled out.
And I'll say in advance, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, for all the new varieties.
Sorry about that.
Kristen asks, this is a soil question. What type of soil mixture is recommended for newly purchased citrus trees, and which fertilizers do you prefer? She asked a little bit about the schedule. I guess schedule of just fertilizing.
Yeah, schedule is a difficult thing. Well, you look at the trees I've got here, and my schedule is I look in here. If I see something turning yellow, I know it needs to be fertilized. I've been doing this a long time. It's the seat of the pants. You just kind of know that you know that you know. I don't use a schedule. We fertilize every week during the growing season.
But the safe answer for them is to follow what it says on the package of fertilizer they're using.
That's the safe answer. But then some varieties, and citrus is a heavy feeder. Yeah. Citrus is going to require more. Kind of get an overall view of what color your citrus is and how much you're putting in there every week. If it's getting too dark green, you're putting too much. If you start burning the buds out of it, you put way too much. If you kill the tree,
don't put that much next time.
Might be better to get another hobby.
Yeah.
It's always better to be safe than sorry. Too little fertilizer is not going to kill your tree. It's going to yellow. It's not going to grow, but it's easy to up that rate. Once you've overdone it, that's a total different thing. That's hard to recover from. So err on the side of caution. And you ask about soil. We recommend our soil, the 511 soil. There's nothing wrong with 511. All soils were originally some kind of bark base. Pine bark is a wonderful base. Then you need something in it to help aerate it, and most everybody used perlite. At one time they were putting vermiculite in it, but that's a little too much holding power for citrus. Then you have to add a little bit of peat moss. The problem with that type soil is there's no live bacteria, no live microbes in it. We're trying to put together a 911 rescue mix that you can add to those pots that will add everything you need. It'll have all your calcium. It'll have your iron. It'll have your manganese, your magnesium. The miners that your fertilizer has, this will be just a booster for those soils.
And then you just really need to know how to water what you've got. That's the bigger part.
The main thing is learn your plants, and you know, everybody says if you sing to them, they do better, and I have found out that is really good, because while you're singing to that plant, you're seeing what its needs are. So spend a few minutes there and see what your plants need.
Perfect. We're going to go back to the other soil question, but Judy asks, can a lemon tree stock be grafted on an orange tree, and would you teach a class on grafting citrus? Now, we can do a YouTube video.
We have done some videos. We plan to continue doing some videos. I plan to do some fancier videos. I'd like to do some tea budding, some chip budding. We mostly graft here. That's the easiest thing to learn. It grows out easier. For the beginner, that's the easiest thing to do. What was the other part?
It was just, could you graft a lemon to an orange?
There's only a few root stocks that have incapabilities of taking a graft. Kumquats grafted onto swingle rootstock is one that just will not work. It might live a few weeks and then die, but it's not going to live long term. We use very little swingle rootstock. We don't sell swingle rootstock. I don't know of anything that we grow here that has incapabilities, except trying to graft a kumquat to a grapefruit. That don't work. But oranges, lemons, kumquats, they all work together. But kumquats and grapefruits, they just don't jive.
Okay, now, and if she's not really talking about rootstock and just asking if she can multi-graft or add to an orange tree, you can obviously do that as well.
There's a guy in California I know of that I think has over 100 varieties on one tree. It's amazing to look at. I've put as many as 20 on one tree. There's no limit.
Perfect. And now back to Dave's question. This is a much longer question about soil, and maybe talk a little bit about the benefits, the pitfalls, the things that you had already talked about a little bit. But how would you make soil if you lived in the northern states? He's in zone 5B, so the soil needs to withstand summer conditions, which can be hot and humid and wet. Then it needs to spend nearly 6 months indoors. Soil seems to be pretty forgiving outside. Inside, it's pretty unforgiving in his experience. So what exactly would you add to make the soil? What ratios would you use? I don't know if you'll get into that as much, but since the pots need to be moved in and out, most of my trees are currently in 511 and the roots are rotting and the mixture stays wet even though the water drains out the bottom nearly instantly. I'm trying 2 trees in Pro Mix, the blue bag, with lots of perlite and rice hulls mixed in. I just can't seem to get my soil right. Seems like a lot of variables.
That's a lot of variables, and the more things you try, the more confused you're going to get. Some of the soil salesmen tell us that you can grow in river sand if you know what to add and you know how to treat your tree. And that's pretty much right.
Mm-hmm.
Best thing to do is get a soil that's easy for you to get. If it's staying too wet, put a piece of plastic over the top of it. Mound you some soil up there, put some empty pots in there, split a piece of plastic, pull it around it, secure it to that pot so it don't rain in it. Water it from the bottom if you need to. Put a little cut in the side that you can add water. I just don't understand pots staying too wet.
It's hard to think that 511 would stay too wet and rot roots, though.
Yeah, but if they stay too wet for too long and your pH and fertility is not right, that tree roots will rot. A tree that is growing good and growing healthy is not going to have rotten roots nearly as easy as a tree that's sitting there stagnant.
True. That's right.
You want that tree always healthy and growing, and that's pulling water through the root system and pulling that water out of the pot and then expelling it out the top. But a tree that's just sitting there stagnant, it's just waiting to have problems.
And it seems like if you've got a few trees all in different mixes and you're doing that experiment to try to find out what the best mix is, really the answer is find the mix that works quickly and put them all in that, so that way you're not juggling it.
And we use a peat-based mix, locally grown in Lithuania. It's the most expensive soil we can find, but it works the best. Shipping is expensive, but running around trying different soils and trying to mix it yourself can get rather expensive too, especially if you're ordering it. We know what the soil we sell does. You can look at the trees we grow. It works for us, and yes, I have tried everything under the sun. But when I found something that worked, I stuck with it.
But again, with that said, a DIY kind of stuff, they can find something that works as long as you're willing to put everything into it that it needs, and then just make sure the watering matches.
A pine bark, and use the smallest pieces of pine bark you can find. We used to even have pine bark ground up and added, it was decomposed and then added back, and that was our peat. Okay. So there's nothing wrong.
It's possible.
There's nothing wrong with pine bark based soil if you have everything else you need added to it and get your pH correct.
And that's the part that most people typically don't hear about.
That's the hard part to do, is everything else you have to add.
All right, let me just look real quick to make sure that we answered everything on here. We'll do another one of these at some point in the future just to see what other questions might be out there. And obviously Hershell is a little bit of a wealth of knowledge. Sometimes he shares too much, sometimes he shares too little. But he's always willing to share something. So if we can share on topics that people want to hear, this isn't a bad deal for them.
Yeah, the best thing to do is send us your questions, tell us what you want to know. I don't know everything, but I know the people that do know. Being in the trade, that's one good thing.
A lot of good friends.
I get to talk to the guys that own nurseries that you could lose mine in. And that's how large some of them are. I get to visit them quite regular, and they're willing to share. They might not be as willing to share on Facebook as I am, but they're willing to share. Perfect.
I appreciate you guys. I'll put this up on Facebook for you. I may also make a little spot on the website. That way people can come and take a look and get some answers to questions they may have that may be similar to these. And we're looking to expand some of these videos for you guys. MadisonCitrusNursery.com. It'll probably be on a care section, but you can find it on there.
We appreciate your business. Thank you for your time.